How long could you survive if winter lasted 9 months? Temperatures plunged to -40 degrees, and the only thing standing between you and death was a thin tent on an empty steppe, in Mongolia. That is not a travel experience. It is daily life for millions of people, from the perspective of modern cities in the United States, where heat comes with the flip of a switch and water flows the moment you turn a tap. This life sounds almost unbelievable. Yet on the steppe, every habit is the result of hundreds of years of adaptation to a brutal natural world. From how people keep warm, eat, and bathe, to customs that leave outsiders both curious and confused, what is truly astonishing is not how different they are from us. It is how profoundly human beings can change simply to keep going. And once you understand that, you will never look at this world the same way again. If you think this story is simply about strange habits meant to entertain, you may change your mind very quickly, because behind those seemingly unbelievable images lies a cold, uncompromising logic of survival that is deeply human. Mongolia is not a land of random customs. Every choice here is measured by one question: will it help people survive the next winter? On the vast steppe, where the distance between two families can be greater than the size of an entire town in the United States, the idea of comfort almost disappears. There is no central heating, no water pipes stretching for hundreds of miles. What people have are livestock, freezing winds, and knowledge passed down through generations. That reality has shaped ways of living that outsiders are quick to judge. But insiders understand there was never another option. The round tent standing alone in the grassland is more than shelter. It is engineered to retain heat, withstand powerful winds, and be taken down within hours when herds must move. Fuel is not always wood or coal, but whatever is most available on the steppe. It may sound hard to accept, but it is the most effective way to stay alive when every other energy source is a luxury. Even daily routines like eating and hygiene clearly reflect these harsh conditions. When water is precious and cold itself can be deadly, people are forced to redefine their standards of living, not because they do not know other ways, but because those ways do not fit the reality of this land. And from this foundation of survival, the stories of Mongolian culture, customs, and daily life begin to unfold, no longer as surface-level curiosity, but as a journey into understanding just how remarkably human beings can adapt to endure. To truly understand how people adapt to this land, you have to begin with what they treat as the highest priority: preserving heat and conserving energy. On the Mongolian steppe, the cold does not arrive only at night. It is present all day, carried by the wind and clinging to the body. That is why every daily decision revolves around a single question: how do we avoid losing heat too quickly? The traditional round tent sits low to the ground, with a compact structure and no sharp corners for the wind to slip through. Inside, the stove stands at the center, not only for cooking, but to keep the entire space at a temperature the human body can endure. Every object is placed close together, not because space is limited, but to reduce heat loss. For people living in large cities in the United States, this can be hard to imagine. But in these conditions, open space equals risk. The choice of fuel reflects the same hard realism. When trees are scarce and transporting coal is expensive, people rely on what their livestock provides. This is not a temporary solution. It is a stable one, proven across generations. This fuel burns slowly, releases steady heat, and can be stored throughout the winter, something very few other energy sources on the steppe can offer. Even clothing follows the same logic of heat preservation. Thick, heavy layers that are rarely changed are not signs of carelessness. Changing clothes in extreme cold can cause sudden heat loss and shock the body. From the outside, these habits are often labeled as backward. In reality, they are the result of centuries of observation and adaptation. In a place where every mistake can cost health, or even a life, once the cold is brought under some control, the next challenge Mongolians face is food. On the steppe, eating is not about flavor or variety. It is about long-lasting energy. Every meal is a calculation, because winter can stretch on for months and access to new food sources is almost impossible. Meat and dairy sit at the center of the diet. Livestock are not just property. They are a living bank, providing the protein and fat the body needs to survive extreme temperatures. Dishes that may make outsiders hesitate carry a very different meaning here. They are prepared to preserve nutrition, minimize waste, and last for long periods without modern refrigeration. Milk is used in many forms, from drinking it fresh to fermenting it, drying it, and pressing it into small, compact pieces. This turns a perishable resource into something that can be carried across long journeys. Meat is used completely, from muscle to organs, not because options are limited, but because there is no reason to discard anything that can help someone survive the winter. For audiences in the United States, where food is abundant and wasting it is common, this way of eating can feel shocking. But on the steppe, waste is not just a bad habit, it is a danger. Every piece of meat left behind means less energy for the freezing days ahead. In these meals that seem simple and repetitive, a powerful philosophy becomes clear. People do not try to conquer nature, they learn how to live within it. And that is why, no matter how harsh the conditions become, life on the steppe continues. Generation after generation, after warmth and food are secured. Another part of Mongolian life that often confuses outsiders is hygiene. By the standards of modern cities in the United States, where heated bathrooms and hot water are always available, bathing infrequently is quickly labeled as unclean. But on the steppe, the issue is not awareness, it is nature itself. Water here is not easy to access. In winter, many sources freeze solid, and collecting water means breaking ice in brutal cold. More importantly, contact with water at extreme temperatures can be dangerous. One poorly timed bath can cause rapid heat loss, leading to severe illness or frostbite. Limiting bathing, then, is not neglect. It is a way to protect the body, instead of relying on water. People developed methods of staying clean that fit their environment. Thick clothing made from wool and leather naturally manages moisture, reducing odor while retaining heat. At the same time, the cold winds and dry air of the steppe slow the growth of bacteria compared to humid climates. These hygiene standards may feel uncomfortable to outsiders, but they reveal an important truth. Human life cannot follow a single universal template. What is considered optimal in one environment can become a serious risk in another. When you look deeper, you realize this difference is not a gap between civilization and backwardness. It is a gap between completely different living conditions. And it is precisely that difference that forces people to invent ways of surviving that make sense for their world. Even when those ways challenge the assumptions of modern life, beyond the tense and high-energy meals. The inner life of the Mongolian people is also shaped by the harshness of the steppe itself. Living in an open landscape where humans are small before nature, social bonds take on a very different meaning. Here, community is not an abstract idea. It is a condition for survival. The distance between families can be vast. Yet when help is needed, it is given without hesitation. A herd gone missing, a sudden blizzard, or an illness in the middle of winter can quickly turn into disaster without support from others. That is why trust and sharing come first. Not because of lofty ideals, but because no one survives alone on the steppe. Gatherings, festivals, and communal activities often happen during the rare moments when the weather allows it. They are not just entertainment. They are ways to reinforce social ties. In a landscape that seems empty and unforgiving, people find warmth in one another's presence. A kind of warmth no fuel source can replace. For audiences in the United States, where individualism is celebrated and privacy is a core value, this way of life may provoke reflection. On the steppe, privacy is not unknown, but it can never rank above collective safety. Each person understands that their own survival is bound to the well-being of others. It is within this reality that social customs and unwritten rules take shape, not to control people, but to keep the community intact. When nature always holds the upper hand, humans learn to rely on one another, and from that mutual dependence, a simple yet resilient system of values has endured, generation after generation. When you look more closely at life on the steppe, one thing becomes clear: what we often call strange is simply a difference in how the world is understood. For Mongolians, nature is not something to be conquered, it is something to be listened to and respected. That mindset shapes how they treat the land, their livestock, and one another. Livestock are not viewed only as economic assets. They sit at the center of a living cycle where humans, animals, and the environment depend on each other. Seasonal movement is not instability. It is balance. Staying too long in one place can exhaust the grass and damage the ecosystem. Moving at the right time allows the steppe to recover and protects future food sources for the herds. This outlook is far removed from the settled lifestyle common in the United States, where people often try to control the environment through infrastructure and technology. On the steppe, rigid structures are not just ineffective, they can be dangerous. Flexibility becomes the key to survival. Tents can be taken down quickly. Daily routines shift with the weather. Plans for tomorrow are always open. That same flexibility shapes how success and stability are defined. Stability does not mean permanence. Success is not measured by owning more, but by the ability to endure each harsh season. When a family survives the winter safely, that alone is a major achievement. From the outside, this way of life is sometimes dismissed as slow or outdated. In truth, it is the product of a deep philosophy, one where people accept their limits and learn to live in harmony with the world around them. And that philosophy raises a powerful question for modern society: does progress always mean more control? Or sometimes, does it mean knowing when to stop? When all these pieces come together, the picture of life on the Mongolian steppe becomes much clearer. This is not a story of poverty or deprivation. It is a story of choices forced by an unforgiving environment. What first shocks outsiders slowly becomes understandable once it is placed in the right context, from staying warm, to eating, hygiene, and social relationships. Every part of life revolves around a single goal: survival under extreme conditions. When the standards of the modern world no longer apply, people are compelled to build a new set of rules based on reality, not comfort. That is what makes the nomadic way of life so resilient, even though it runs against many values that are widely accepted today. For audiences in the United States, this story almost invites comparison. We live in cities where technology shields us from nature, but also distances us from our true limits. On the steppe, every freezing wind is a reminder that humans are not the center of the world. That humility does not weaken people. It allows them to endure. What truly invites reflection is this: placed in similar conditions, people in any country would change just as deeply. Habits, norms, and beliefs that feel permanent are far more flexible than we like to admit. Mongolia is not a strange exception to the world. It is a living example of the remarkable human ability to adapt, and perhaps the greatest value of this story is not found in surface-level differences, but in the question it leaves behind. If our environment were to change suddenly, would we be willing to adjust how we live? Or would we cling to comforts that only exist when conditions allow them to survive? As the story reaches its end, what lingers is not shock or curiosity, but a shift in perspective. Life on the Mongolian steppe forces us to confront a truth that modern society often avoids. No matter how advanced we become, human beings remain deeply dependent on the environment around them. In the United States, comfort is taken for granted. Temperature is controlled with a button. Food arrives from across the world. Most natural risks are softened by technology, but that protection can also create an illusion of total control. On the steppe, no such illusion exists. Nature is always in charge, and survival depends on the ability to adapt. This does not mean one way of life is better than another. It shows that every model of living has limits. When conditions change, what once seemed normal can quickly become unsuitable. Mongolians do not live this way because they reject modernity, but because familiar forms of modernity do not solve the challenges they face every single day. This story raises a larger question for the modern world. As climate change, resource scarcity, and global shocks become more visible, adaptability may matter more than comfort. Communities that have long lived with hardship may hold lessons the modern world has never been forced to learn. In the end, Mongolia is not just a distant land with unfamiliar customs. It is a reminder that human strength does not come from controlling everything, but from understanding our limits and learning how to live in balance within them. And as you close this story, perhaps the most important thing is not Mongolia itself, but how it changes the way we see the world around us. We often judge a society by its level of comfort, its speed of development, or the modern look of its infrastructure. Life on the steppe reveals a quieter, more durable measure, the ability to survive when all favorable conditions disappear. Mongolians do not live this way to attract curiosity from the outside world. They live the way their land allows. Every habit, every custom is the result of challenges repeated across generations. Once you understand that, difference is no longer something to judge. It becomes something to reflect on. Because if we were placed in the same conditions, there is a strong chance we would make the same choices. This story does not ask you to admire or imitate a distant way of life. It simply invites you to pause and ask yourself a few honest questions. What in our current lives is truly necessary? What exists only because conditions make it easy? And if those conditions were to change, how much of our familiar way of living would remain? If this story offered you a new perspective, share your thoughts. What surprised you the most about life on the steppe? The cold, the food, or the philosophy behind it all? The conversation does not end here. It truly begins when each of us asks these questions for ourselves and listens to the answers with honesty.